Letteri, thank you for joining us. I can only imagine that you are knee-deep right now in post-production on the next two installments. Is that correct?
We're just getting started on it. We've kind of finished up Hobbit 1 a few weeks ago, and everyone's taking a little bit of a break, especially with the holidays coming up. So we'll hit it hard in January.
Mm-hmm. Uh, can you talk a bit about what you're working on there? I mean, how effects heavy are the next two?
Well, they're going to be pretty effects heavy, but no, can't get into too much detail yet.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just saying if I could prize something out of you for the fans. Um, so I want to start off by talking about this high frame rate
Mm-hmm.
that's used throughout the film. Could you explain what that is for the people at home who might not be too tech savvy?
Well, normally when you shoot a film, you shoot at 24 frames a second. We decided to shoot this movie at a higher frame rate of 48 frames a second. And the reason behind that is to reduce the amount of blur that you see in the images, which makes everything look more realistic. It's closer to how your eye really sees things, in the real world. And it also makes it a little bit easier to watch in stereo.
Hmm. So how does that affect your job as a special effects designer?
Well, it just means there's more work. We have twice as many frames to make, so it's not exactly twice as much work, but we've got to do a lot of things just require more of it to get done. Animation requires more frames. Things like that have to happen.
Hmm. Now you've been at the forefront of a lot of really groundbreaking special effects movies. Starting all the way back with you were involved with Jurassic Park. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And then you designed the special effects on the Two Towers and Return of the King and
Mm-hmm.
Avatar and
Mm-hmm.
Rise of the Planet of the Apes. All of these uh, films that are known for their performance capture
Mm-hmm.
special effects. Can you talk a bit about what that is for people who might not be familiar with that?
Well, performance capture was this idea that grew out of watching Andy Serkis performing Gollum back on the Two Towers. Andy was hired at the time essentially to do the voice of Gollum, and that's how you did characters in those days. You put an actor in a booth, recorded the voice, and you used keyframe animation to create the motions of the characters. But we watched Andy performing, in the set with the other actors because it just got a lot more energy that way, both for him and for the other actors' performances. And then we thought, well, gee, if we could just capture that energy and make Gollum use Andy's performance directly, wouldn't that be an ideal way to do it? So we started experimenting with this idea of motion capture back on the Two Towers. And that's a way of just recording an actor's movements and then using that as the basis for the animation of the characters, sort of like sampling, movement. And that worked pretty well for us on Gollum. We started to kind of expand on that idea in subsequent years. With King Kong, we learned how to capture movement for the face. On Avatar, we learned how to put both together, which is why we started calling it performance capture. Now you had an integrated, body and facial performance and dialogue all happening at the same time. And then when we got to the point of, doing it for The Hobbit, we could now capture Andy on set. So his performance is not being done, at a later date as we had to do in the past, but what you see is him actually acting in the set with all the other actors. And same thing with all the other characters that we created. We're able to use performance capture now for the Goblin King, for Azog, for a lot of the goblins, the trolls, a number of the characters that we create now. We use that to give the animators kind of a starting point to work from.
Hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask a question about the because I knew that Gollum was performance captured, but I didn't know if, say, the orcs or the trolls or if all of those were performance capture as well. So you use those as a model for the animators, well, CGI artists too.
Exactly. Performance capture is an animation technique, and we use it to get as much of a physically correct performance as you can. Not only technically correct, but then getting the physicality of what an actor brings to the role and brings to the performance. But because these characters are not human characters, animators still have to get in there and work with them and massage the performance and turn it into the character that you see on the screen. So it's always a hybrid, when we're creating these characters on the screen. But it's great working with actors that way because you just get something that has a nice realism to it.
Mm-hmm. there's been all this talk about performance capture
Mm-hmm.
from certain actors and
Mm-hmm.
then makeup artists who say that it's sort of endangering their craft. Can you talk about that? Your thoughts on that?
I actually think it's expanding their craft. I mean, if you look at any of the characters that we did, the fact that we could do them and have actors involved was only because we could do it with performance capture. Otherwise, these characters would not have been created that way. Um, without a character like Gollum, I'm not sure where you'd go with a movie like this. That's the
Mhm.
whole point, is that we can create these fantastic characters that you couldn't do any other way, and that allows these films to get made.
Right. Can we talk about some of your work outside of the character creation?
Hmm.
Did you do a lot of work on expanding the world beyond what art department could do? Um,
Hmm. Yeah, a good example of that would be the scene inside the Goblin Caverns, where
mhm,
the art direction was to have this kind of big, vast interior cavern space populated by thousands of goblins, just living with these sort of scavenged households and these walkways connecting them all. It was a very intricate space that we designed to take advantage of three dimensions, so that we can really do something interesting with stereo in those scenes. So that was all really put together. Uh, by having this kind of digital vision of what the whole space would look like, and then crafting the live action parts that could be shot. So the art department would build, bits of set for the actors to work on, the dwarves and the goblins and the mocap actors, and then we would drop that into the middle of this vast, three-dimensional environment and extend it and just make what we would shoot be just a piece of this digital world.
mhm.
Oftentimes, what you see in there is just completely digital.
Right. Now, do you have a lot of say in the design of, say, the characters or of that world, or is that someone else's thing altogether, and then you just carry it out through?
It's a little bit of both. The process evolves to where Peter will have an idea. A lot of times he discusses the initial designs with Richard Taylor and What a Workshop, so they present him with a lot of choices. He'll lock down on what he likes the best. We turn that into a digital character, and at that point we go through a final set of revisions once we see what we need to do to really make that character perform on screen.
Mhm. Uh, could you talk a bit about one of my favorite sequences in the movie is the rock fight sequence?
Mm-hmm.
Can you take us through the creation of that? Because I guess you didn't have the actors on actual rocks, but uh, how do you create something like that?
Well, we started with this idea of pre-visualization. We built low-res models of the rock characters based on some preliminary designs, and we got a digital version of a piece of landscape in New Zealand, and we kind of scouted it and used that to build the to set the scene for the whole thing.
Hmm.
And then we started doing previs to tell the story. So Peter would work with the previs team to say, this is the action I want to follow, and they start fleshing that out with very specific beats and very specific gags. Then from there, we determined what could be shot on a stage, and so pieces of the rock stage were built, and the dwarves were, in costume on these bits of the rock stage. And then again, we would fit this all into this bigger digital version of the whole landscape and start working out which beats needed to be extended digitally and which needed to be created entirely digitally. The rock giants themselves, the stone giants, of course, had to be completely digital creation. So it was a mix of all these techniques we've been talking about. Using some motion capture, using animation. Designing everything with an art department, but still building this complete virtual environment. So it becomes like a hybrid of techniques. And at any particular shot, you could look at a close up of the guy shot against the rock wall, and that just might be entirely in camera. Or I think we added rain to all of the shots,
Hmm.
to where you could have a wide shot of the giant waking up with the dwarves finding out that they're on the knees of one of the giants. And a shot like that would be completely digital. And there are shots that are somewhere in between.
Right. When you're dealing with a scene like that, obviously, during post-production, the filmmaker is with the editor trying to get the pacing of the film down and get the
Hmm.
film to an appropriate length. Uh, and then you have these sequences which are just so massive and effects driven and really don't exist without the
Hmm.
effects. I mean, so do you give them a guesstimation of how long it's going to be, or do you give them storyboards so that they can work with that just while you guys are working to get this done? How does that work?
We use previs these days for that.
Hmm.
We really don't use storyboarding at all anymore. So we'll start with some idea of previs, so that when Peter shoots the live action, they'll have in the editorial suite both the live action takes and the previs takes, so they can start to build up the scene, replacing previs with live action, recutting it based on the new pieces that were shot. If there are any shots that are missing, sometimes we'll just get a card back with the title that says what needs to happen there. That's our cue to take it back into previs and go through trying to fill out what that action might be, rebuilding bits of those scenes. So it becomes a process where we iterate it with Peter and with Jabez Olson, who's the editor, and try to send pieces back and fit it in and kind of grow the sequence organically.
Hmm. And previs, for the folks at home who might not be familiar with
Mhm.
that, that is saying, okay, this is what we'll see in our wide, and then we need a close up of that, and then
Mhm.
am I in the
Yeah,
correct?
previs is short for pre-visualization, and it's taken the place of storyboarding in a lot of films. And as I say, we use it pretty much exclusively these days. What it means is, rather than having a two-dimensional drawing of shot to shot, we build three-dimensional models of the characters and the environments and the creatures, all very low resolution, so we can very quickly block out what the action wants to be, work out what the sequence of the action is, much as you would have done with the storyboard in the past. Rearrange things, try different camera angles, try different gags, and that has the advantage that it can go directly into Avid, and so the editor can cut with it.
Hmm. So where do you see special effects going in the next 10 years? Obviously, it's grown leaps and bounds
Mhm.
since Jurassic Park. Uh, where do you see it going now?
Well, the big trend is it's becoming much more integrated with the filmmaking process. Just the whole process that I described for you of pre-visualization means that we start to work much earlier with the team, even at the point where we're doing scenes before there's a script, and then carrying through that work all the way through the live action shoot, because the previous sort of serves as a blueprint for what needs to be shot, and what can be done live action, what has to be done digitally, and then all the way through to the very end. So it's become something that's kind of embedded with all aspects of the filmmaking process.
Hmm. And can you talk a bit about working with 3D,
Mhm.
as this film is in, and Avatar, and I guess so many other
Mhm.
films that you're going to be working
Mhm.
on in the future?
Hmm. By 3D, you mean stereo, which is what we're looking at, when we see things projected with two eyes. And I make that distinction because most of the work that you see on the screen that we do is actually created in 3 dimensions inside a computer. We render from two cameras, which gives you that stereo vision effect. So we make that distinction because everything is a recreation of the world in 3 dimensions that we work with. That's a long way of answering your question, because by virtue of the fact that we do create everything in 3 dimensions inside the computer, we can then take this stereo camera rig and photograph it from these different angles, just as if you had a live action stereo rig, with two real cameras on a set being flown around and shooting it. And that allows us to integrate with live action filmmaking in a way that you can bounce back and forth between live action and digital, and all the techniques that you need to develop for working in stereo, for editorial and camera and perspective. All this new vocabulary that's being worked out for shooting in stereo applies both live action or digitally now, because you've got shots that are completely live action, you've got shots that are completely digital, and you've got shots in the middle that are a mix of the two. So you need the techniques to apply no matter how you make it work. But therefore, it makes it very easy for us to work in stereo.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for talking about the film. I really appreciate your time. Uh, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.